Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the news that trade volumes have fallen since we left the EU. This is not news to this channel, of course, because I've been explaining this for some time, but it is now being comprehensively explained in the Financial Times in a way which makes it way easier to counter the Brexit boneheads who keep using inflation fiddles to try to prove that somehow raising trade barriers actually improves your trade. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So you've almost certainly seen the Brexiteers saying that our trade has actually flourished since Brexit. The entire concept was always ridiculous. It was like telling someone to raise the incline on the treadmill at the gym and then tell them it will make it easier for them to run. The entire concept was as ridiculous as it was wrong. If you raise trade barriers, you make trade harder. It's childishly simple to understand. If you tell businesses who used to be able to just export goods across all of the major consumers in Europe really easily, just like inside your own country, but now they're going to need mountains of paperwork, that the journey will take longer, that there might be additional costs and import duties on the other side, that some of the goods you won't be able to export at all, then of course you're going to sell less or do so with lower profits. And this concept, you know, that we would just compensate with more trade around the world was utterly ridiculous. It costs more to transport goods to the rest of the world, so we'd need to massively ramp up the amount we're selling to more distant markets to make the same profits. And those markets don't want to massively ramp up what they buy from us. Apart from anything else, we haven't compensated anyway. We haven't actually lowered the trade barriers to the rest of the world to the extent they used to be with Europe. So we haven't even lowered those trade barriers with the rest of the world. So there's no mathematical way that Brexit was ever going to have a net boost to our trade, no matter how many unicorns we chased. But the Brexiteers insisted that our trade was growing. Oh, really? What's this then? This is a chart of our total trade in goods between volumes, where Brexiteers either get it wrong or, in the worst cases, deliberately mislead their followers, is that they compare trade over different years in currency value. Oh, but we got our data from the Office for National Statistics. Yes, but the Office for National Statistics trade data for 2017 is in 2017 values of the pound, and in 2019 values of the pound, and in 2023 values of the pound. You're not taking inflation into account. It's a fiddle. £1 billion in 2019 was worth more than £1 billion last year. And because we've had raging inflation, the value is actually a lot more in 2019. So what you need to compare is volumes of trade, which is what this new article in the FT does. And going back to 2002 is helpful because it allows us to compare the two major global shocks of recent times. The banking crisis, of course, hit our trade, though it never went into negative growth until the Tories had been in power for a year, slashing our productivity with their austerity measures. But it recovered, though never up to the levels enjoyed under Labour. It then took another hit after the Brexit referendum as businesses started to see Britain as potentially an unreliable supplier in the near future. But we were still in the single market and customs union, so trade didn't actually get more difficult, so it continued to grow. Then in 2020, it collapsed very badly. This was COVID, of course. Productivity shut down across the world for a time. That it might have run into 2021 was also understandable. From 2022 onwards, there was not a single day of travel restrictions, so that trade should have largely recovered as it did in other countries. It didn't. Now, then we consider it completely collapsed in 2023. And this is where you need to bear in mind a couple of things. First, Brexit didn't all happen at once. We imagined, we left the EU and that was it. And then even for those who recognised there was a difference between leaving the EU and leaving the single market and customs union, even then it was all, although the EU applied their standards and customs controls immediately, we applied our import controls in phases. So 2022 looks worse than 2021. That's the year we implemented customs control. It is also the year of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. That muddies the waters a little as well. But nothing new happened in 2023. The only factor last year was the ever-rising trade barriers of Brexit. Second thing to consider is it takes time for supply chains to reorder. What's been happening ever since we left the single market and customs union is British exports have become less reliable. Increasingly where it's possible. It's not always possible, of course, But where it is possible, European customers have been finding alternative suppliers elsewhere in the EEA. We didn't just have a collapse of trade in 2021 and that was that. With each passing year, it's just been getting worse, and it will not improve until we start to lower those trade barriers. Now, there are ways to lower them a little without joining the Single Market and Customs Union, which is what Labour are proposing to do in the next Parliament. But ultimately, if we want to see serious growth in trade again, we're not going to get it by negotiating trade deals with far-flung markets who can see that we're so desperate that we even let New Zealand bend us over and spank us. No offence to New Zealand, but they should not have been calling the shots in trade talks with an economy 12 times their size. But as I say, given the amount of trade that we had and have with the EU compared with the rest of the world collectively, at least the major markets, which will include the United States and China and India and Brazil, would all have to lower their trade barriers to us to the extent we used to have them with the EU. That means completely free trade. And even then, it still wouldn't be worth quite as much because of the extra costs of transporting to Brazil and the United States and China and India. But none of those countries are going to lower their trade barriers to the extent we had them lowered with the EU. So it is simply mathematically impossible for a hard Brexit ever, no matter what we did, no matter what we did with our regulations, no matter what we did with our trade deals, mathematically impossible to compensate for the trade loss to Europe with free trade agreements around the world. In the FT report, it cites the fact that in 2023, trade increased by 1.9% on average across other G7 countries. So globally, there was no issue with growing trade. For us, it fell by 1.7%. So global effects can't be blamed. Now, if anyone could point to a major shock to the system which occurred in 2023 and would particularly affect the UK but not other G7 countries on average, then yes, you would have an argument. There's this other thing as well, so it's not necessarily Brexit. But there was no such event to point to. There was nothing that would particularly affect the UK and not other G7 countries. The fact of the matter is, as economists are saying, 2023 was the first year where only the overriding impact of UK trade was Brexit. And that's what's happened. You couldn't blame COVID this time. You couldn't blame the war in Ukraine. The only thing that happened in 2023 was Brexit that was particular to the UK. The breakdown into individual sectors is also telling. It doesn't just show that there was an overall drop in trade, but that all sectors of goods were affected except crude materials. But we're not exactly a nation with a lot of natural resources to sell, so that's not particularly helpful. But what we have here in clear terms is a collapse of traded goods. It's worth noting that our service trade has continued to grow. And of course, our services are by far and away the major part of our economy. But that's because that was much less affected by Brexit. But there are sectors which have still been hit, like just ask touring musicians, for example. So it's not like all services are fine. Also, there's absolutely zero evidence that Brexit has helped our trading services either. It's just naturally being allowed to grow. So the fact that it's growing, which it would have done anyway, is not a benefit of Brexit. It's in spite of Brexit, because Brexit has still hurt some sectors of our service economy. But the fact that our trading goods has collapsed is most definitely a downside of Brexit. And that was always a fact, which I pointed out many times before. But now we have a nice, shiny, clear chart in the Financial Times. Let's see the Brexiteers try to label the FT as Marxist Ramonas. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.